Hi, my name is Beth. I'm an RA in Housing 1, G-Court Ride or Die, and I wanted to talk to you guys about reacting to sexual assault and Title IX incidents as an RA. Just a really quick disclaimer, some of the information that I'm saying might trigger some people, so if you need to pause the video or anything like that, I won't be offended virtually, it's okay. But something that I just want to say before I start as well is that some RAs will go their entire residential life career without having to deal with this at all, and others like me will unfortunately have to deal with residents that report Title IX incidents to them fairly often. So after dealing with this a few times as an RA, I'm currently a senior right now, I took a lot out of my experiences, and I think that there were things that I wanted to share with you guys as advice from me, a senior about to graduate. So first, when you're dealing with a Title IX incident, just really briefly, the Office of Student Rights and Responsibilities will typically go over this at training, but just so you know, you always want to call a complex director. So you don't want to ask too much information. Once someone reports something to you, you want to tell them that you are a mandated reporter. So anything that they say, you are required to report, and it's a state mandated law. And then you want to call your complex director. Most of the time the complex director will handle it from there. They will contact all the appropriate resources, counseling services, things like that, emergency services if necessary. But the biggest thing that you need to remember is to stay calm, don't panic, and then contact your complex director or whoever is on duty at the time. So when I first started as an RA 3 years ago, during training we went over the procedures, but there were some things that I felt like I wasn't well prepared for, which is why I chose to present on this years later. I felt that I wasn't prepared to handle Title IX incidents afterwards because you get so personally affected by what happens. And I'm going to go through it in a few minutes, but some cases will be easier to handle and others will personally impact you. And that was what I took out of my experiences as a first and second year RA, which is why I have continually tried to speak on this during RA trainings in the past. So when you're first handling a Title IX incident, when a resident comes up to you and says, something happened to me and I want to talk to you about it, after all is said and done, after you've contacted your complex director, me personally, I went through a lot of very terrible feelings after my first one or two. Self-blame is very common. I know that when one of my residents I was very, very close with told me, I blamed myself for not knowing earlier because it had been about 3 days after the incident happened that she told me. And I was mad at myself for not knowing, considering I had that resident in my room all the time to talk, and I should have recognized the signs that something was wrong. Anger at the person that is being accused, anger at the friends, anger at anyone, anger at yourself, and also shock. And those kind of emotions, a lot of times we aren't really prepared to handle, and a lot of times as RAs we're taught how to handle those feelings in terms of the resident. So helping a resident get through those feelings, helping a resident when they're having mental health problems. But we don't really talk about it in terms of the RA and what happens on the RA's side after all is said and done. So like I said, this is kind of my viewpoint as advice from an RA who has gone through it all and just wants to tell you some things that I think you should know. So first, it is not always a girl crying silently in her bed. Sometimes, first off, no matter how they identify, girl, boy, whatever it is that they choose to identify as, you need to take them seriously, whatever it is they are telling you that happened. Second, it's not always a girl in general. That's a very bad stereotype. So I just want to throw that out there first, is that be accepting of any resident that comes to you with any problem. Second, honesty is very, very important. The first few times that I was approached with a Title IX incident, I realized that a lot of the residents have no idea what's going to happen afterwards once they report. A lot of them just want help, so they come to you expecting help. But they aren't trained on what happens, they aren't trained on the procedures. A lot of people, especially let's say a freshman that is straight out of high school, they might not know what happens afterwards. So be honest, explain the rape kit. Victims afterwards, if they do choose to have a rape kit performed, it's performed in a hospital, and it is pretty invasive. It's a SANE nurse, a sexual assault nurse examiner comes in, and like I said, it is fairly invasive. They do swab wherever needs to be swabbed, they do remove pubic hair, and a lot of times that rape kit is necessary if they want to take criminal action, or if they want to take any kind of legal action, if they want to take legal action against an accused person. Second, Questioning. So something else that's really important is that the questioning process can be very invasive, a little bit pushy, and it's all because it is necessary in terms of like legislative reasons. So my one resident that I was very close with was terrified to go to the counseling center, and I said, hey, I'll walk with you there if you want. And we got outside and she said, do you mind coming inside with me? I'm really scared to go in. I won't go in if you come in with me. And I said, okay, you're right, I'll come in. So I asked the counselor, may I come in and sit on this session? I won't talk. And they said, okay. So I told my resident, I'm letting you know right now that this session is going to be a lot of deep personal questions that you might not feel comfortable with. Try your best to answer them, and just remember that the counselor is trying to help you. And that's something that was really important, that resident had no idea was going to happen. And the last thing about honesty is victim blaming is very common. So if they choose to tell their family or their friends or anyone that they know, however it is that they feel comfortable, victim blaming is very common, and it's not always directly someone saying, well, you did this to yourself. It might be a friend saying, well, how much did you drink? Well, what were you wearing? And things like that are really important to be honest about with your resident, because sometimes they aren't expecting it, and you need to tell them that that's a very societal thing that we need to work on, but for now they should prepare themselves and tell themselves that it is not their fault. My last advice is to hold their hand, but not literally. I took a course my sophomore year, second semester, about sexual assault victims and perpetrators. It was a criminal justice class, and they tell you this person has been violated in a very, very physical way, and you should avoid touching them at all without their permission. Even sitting on the bed, if you want to sit next to them, ask them, can I sit next to you? I know my immediate instinct, the first and few times afterwards that I was told, I wanted to hug that person and say it's okay, because I like to hug people to comfort them. And I remembered that's probably not a good idea. Don't go in for the hug, don't pat their head, don't do anything like that. Make sure they're okay with it first. And also hold their hand figuratively as well. So hold their hand in the whole process, like I said, explaining what's going to happen next. The next thing, so in this class that I took, that I was talking about earlier, there are primary and secondary victims of sexual assault. Primary victims are the actual victim of the act, and then secondary victims are the people affected emotionally and mentally afterwards. So secondary victims could be family, friends, siblings, roommates, and it could also be the RA that they were reporting to. So I'm just going to go over two cases really briefly of cases in which I was not the secondary victim and that I was. And that's just so you can understand who you should be paying attention to in addition to the victim when you're trying to make sure everyone is mentally okay afterwards. Because our immediate instinct is to help the victim, but you have to remember other people are definitely going to be affected, and you basically have to picture it like the victim is a stone and the secondary victims are fish nearby, and that stone is dropped into a lake, causing those ripples, and the ripples push the fish out of the way. We are the fish, so you have to think who's going to be closest to that rock falling in. So, two experiences. I had a resident approach me. It was not the victim, it was a friend of the victim. That friend told me, hey, your resident was at a party, whatever happened, and I'm not really sure what to do. So I contacted the complex director like you're supposed to, and in this case I was not particularly close with the resident. That friend that reported to me ended up being isolated from that friend group because the friend group was very mad at that resident for coming and approaching me about it. They wanted to keep it a secret. In that case, it was difficult for me to approach the victim, but I did have access to that person that approached me and the friend group. So I focused mostly on secondary victims because that's all I could do. In that case, that friend that was isolated from the friend group was really going through a lot because not only did they lose some friends in the process while they thought they were trying to do the right thing, but they were terrified for that person's well-being. So in that case, focus on that secondary victim. My second experience, I had a very, very rough experience. My first year as a resident assistant, I had fallen asleep and I woke up to very, very loud bangs at my door. And one of my residents was at the door and they said, Beth, we really need to go to this floor, we need to get this medication. And I said, for what? And in summary, I had to go to the other floor to get someone's mental health medication. The resident, when I finally had retrieved everything that we had to retrieve, called 911, called the complex director, was in the common room having a panic attack. This person suffered from very, very bad anxiety, and it turns out that they were triggered by seeing something that reminded them of a former experience involving sexual assault. In that case, this resident was suffering from mental health problems and from remembering things that had happened to her in the past and was bringing it up to friends in the common room. After I had contacted the police and EMS arrived, the resident was very, very angry at me for getting involved at all. I ended up being cornered against a wall and yelled at. And mind you, this is a very extreme case. This will not happen to most people, but I just like to put it out there so you can understand the worst of it. And I was yelled at quite a bit. In that case, the complex director, James Timothy at the time, made sure after everything was said and done and the resident was okay, he pulled me to the side and said, let's talk, and he made sure that I was okay. I did cry. And it's not the end of the world, but you have to remember that you are going to be affected too. We are not going to stand there like soldiers all the time and be blank-faced. We aren't robots. We are dealing with real people. We were all chosen for this job because we are capable of being sympathetic and we are capable of helping people, and we want to help people, especially in their first few years of college. So in this case, just try to remember it's okay if you're affected and get the help you need. Which brings me to my final point. You need to make sure that you help yourself. We go over mental health all the time. We go over how to help our residents, but remember to help yourself. I know I actually suffer from anxiety, and for me, I had to learn how to cope with that. And for some people, it'll be deep breathing. For some people, it'll be yoga. I know that doesn't work for me because I have a lot of energy. I really like Zumba, and I like to dance. I also am 100% the kind of person that sings in the shower. So whatever it is that works for you, make sure that you do it enough and take care of yourself, because in the end, you can't take care of your residents if you are not 100% there. Just to summarize, everything that I said in this video can be applied to not only Title IX incidents, but also to other serious cases. They're called critical incidents in criminal justice terms, but it can be applied to suicide, resident death, harassment, and bullying. Anything that personally affects you. It could be something minor too. You could still be affected regardless, but just make sure that you're taking care of yourself, because in the end, we can't help the residents if we are not 100% there. So good luck in your first year or whatever year that you're in. I'm sure you'll do fantastic, and just make sure that you reach out to people, because in the end, you are a family and a team, and you can reach out to your other resident assistants and your boss and anybody around you. So good luck.